The Bass fired me on a Wednesday. Not just any Wednesday. The Wednesday quarterly financials were due. Our biggest client was threatening to pull a $12 million deal, and legal was 2 signatures away from a contract breach that would make the SEC piss themselves. But sure, let's toss the contracts manager, the one who wrote the indemnity language they're now relying on. Not next week, not gently, but in a conference room with glass walls and a Starbucks crowd watching like it was free HBO. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then they called me the Clause Queen. Some said it with respect, others with an eye roll like I was the lunch lady of legal. Always there, always unnoticed, always somehow holding the place together. My official title was Senior Contracts Manager. 11 years deep at a tech firm that looked like it was built on buzzwords and combat, but actually ran on ironclad clauses and my obsessive attention to risk. I didn't make noise. I made airtight agreements. I didn't play ping pong in the break room or schmoo with product during innovation retreats. I lived in the fine print. While other people flirted with disaster, I was over here threading liability needles like I was sewing a damn wedding dress. I loved it. No, really, I loved it. Give me a red pen, a 30-page draft from sales, and a cup of stale office coffee. And I was happier than a golden retriever in a tennis ball factory. And yeah, before we go deeper, if you've made it this far and you're one of the 90% of folks who listen to stories like this while scrolling emails or flipping grilled cheese, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and toss us a like. Not for me, I've got my legal funds sorted. But the team behind this, they read every click like it's oxygen, helps keep the stories coming, and trust me, you'll want to hear the rest of this one. Anyway, at work, I was the gray cardigan in a room full of pastel hoodies. Never flashy, never messy, just there, dependable. I kept legal, compliant, and quiet. 2 things no one in our office appreciated until everything started to burn. Travis sure didn't. Travis, the new COO, Waltz didn't like he'd won the company in a poker game. He had that startup swagger, always speaking in acronyms, always looping people in and parking problems until someone else solved them. And he hated legacy staff. You could see it in the way he'd say institutional knowledge like it was a skin condition. I was legacy. That made me a threat. Not in the sword-fighting sense, but in the I know what you're doing and why it'll explode kind of way. Travis didn't want guardrails. He wanted yes men. He wanted to sign things fast, flip partnerships like pancakes, and get quoted in TechCrunch before Q4. Me, I wanted to read the damn vendor clause that waived our rights to sue in case of IP theft. Call me old-fashioned, but before Travis showed up, life was weirdly peaceful. I'd start my day with a mug of burnt coffee and a spreadsheet of open contracts. I liked the solitude of it, how every clause was a puzzle. Every deal a minefield I could diffuse with the right indemnity language. I spent years building a system where even if everyone around me lost their minds, the contracts wouldn't. I was the seatbelt in a car full of speed freaks. They didn't like that I pulled the emergency brake sometimes, but they were still alive because of it. People forget in companies like ours, the person who writes the rules quietly becomes the most dangerous person in the building. They just don't realize it until it's too late. Travis blew in like a Red Bull tornado with a 5-0 shadow and an MBA from somewhere expensive but unaccredited. First day, he parked in the CEO's reserved spot, slapped the receptionist on the back like she was his old college roommate, and announced to the entire office, "Time to turn this rocket ship vertical, people!" Which, in his language, meant cut the brakes, throw out the seat belts, and pray we don't nose dive into a mountain. You could practically hear the bandwidth buckle under his ego. He was charming in that fast-talking, spin you around and sign your house away kind of way. He had that faux humble charisma that made interns swoon and board members nod. The kind of guy who ended every sentence with "make sense," like your understanding was part of his genius. He didn't just disregard legacy staff. He treated us like expired milk. The second he found out I'd been here over a decade, he smiled like I just confessed to still using dial-up. "I like fresh eyes," he said once, teeth gleaming. People who think differently, which of course meant people who don't remember how we got sued in 2017 for this exact stunt. Within weeks, he'd started muzzling through contracts like they were Tinder swipes. Sales loved him, product worshipped him, and legal. Legal was being left out of calls, pushed out of deal memos, and sent final drafts 2 minutes before signatures. It was like watching someone build a skyscraper without checking the foundation, and they're using fireworks instead of concrete. Then came the breach point. A vendor contract landed on my desk, retroactively of course, And it didn't just raise red flags, it raised sirens. It was a strategic licensing partnership with a tech firm in Vancouver that on paper looked like a dream. But buried in the boilerplate was a clause that outright violated our NDA. Carefully, professionally, sent a memo up through legal, CC'd compliance, even tagged our usual risk consultant. I didn't shout, didn't make it political, just outlined the liability like I'd done 1,000 times before. 2 hours later, I was summoned to Travis's office. Let me rephrase. I was summoned to his glass fishbowl throne room where he liked holding impromptu meetings like a reality show villain. The guy was practically allergic to doors. I walked in, closed my folder, and sat down. He didn't offer a seat, just leaned against his standing desk, sipping something green and awful from a branded company tumbler. "You don't like the deal," he said without looking at me. "It violates 3 standing agreements and would require disclosure to the SEC. We could be." He held up a finger like he was silencing a child. "No one reads the fine print." Sweetheart, sweetheart. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like we were in a 1950s sitcom, and I should be grateful he even acknowledged my concern. My vision tunneled for a second. Not from rage. I've had plenty of men underestimate me, but from the sheer blinding stupidity of the situation. "You're not sales. You're not strategy. You're not even legal counsel," he went on, smile fading into smug. "Your support red line? Stay in your lane." I could have exploded. I could have screamed, pulled out the documentation, dropped receipts like a reality TV showdown, but I didn't. I nodded, just a small, deliberate nod. Because in that moment, knew something he didn't. Travis thought he was flying a rocket ship, but I'd spent the last 11 years quietly building the escape hatch, and he just strapped himself in. I spent the night staring at the ceiling fan, replaying his words like they were crime scene footage. "Stay in your lane. No one reads the fine print, sweetheart." My jaw hurt from clenching. Not because he insulted me. That part was expected because I knew what he was about to unleash on the company. And the board had no clue. I wasn't just thinking about my job. I was thinking about the multi-million-dollar lawsuits that were going to rip through this place like a chainsaw in a bounce house. So, I followed protocol because I am protocol. First, I drafted a compliance summary outlining the violations in that vendor contract, cited every clause, every SEC disclosure risk, cross-referenced it with prior precedent. No emotion, no opinions, just pure risk analysis. Then I escalated it, ceasing legal compliance, even our internal risk management officer. Quietly, I didn't go full sirens blaring. I let the facts speak, and then I waited. 2 days passed. Radio silence. On the 3rd day, I got an invite. Subject line contract alignment touch point. Harmless, boring. Travis's executive assistant sent it like it was any other alignment meeting, except it was scheduled in the main conference room. The one with all the glass. The one usually reserved for investor pitches and product launches. There were already people inside when I walked in. Travis, obviously, arms folded like a cop in a courtroom. 3 department heads pretending not to make eye contact, and the company lawyer, Beth, flipping through a manila folder like she'd rather be anywhere else. I stepped in. No handshake, no chair offered. Travis didn't even wait for the door to close. "We're terminating your employment," he said, like he was reading a weather report. "Effective immediately for breach of trust." Breach of? I began confused more than angry. You went outside your scope. You escalated confidential deal information. You're not a compliance officer. You're not an attorney. You're support staff. You abused internal channels to delay progress. I could feel every eye in the room looking for somewhere else to land. Even Beth stopped flipping pages. Then Travis reached into the folder and yanked out a copy of my NDA, slammed it down like he was laying the ace of spades. "I'd remind you that this agreement includes confidentiality and non-disparagement provisions. Any further discussion of this issue outside, approved channels will be seen as a violation, which, as you know, carries personal liability." He smiled. He smiled like this was a poker hand and I was bluffing like he just shut me up permanently. That's when I saw it, not the NDA. My NDA, the one I wrote a long time ago, back when our then GC asked me to revise our standard contract for legal staff and senior contract managers to include whistleblower protections and indemnity triggers. Because we were dealing with sensitive regulatory issues, And he wanted anyone raising red flags to be shielded. That was paragraph 12B. Pulled a copy from my folder, not the one Travis had, but mine, highlighted in yellow. Years of revision notes in the margins. I slid it slowly across the glass table toward Beth. My finger tapped exactly where it mattered. 12B, indemnity clause. In the event of termination coinciding with documented regulatory concern or protected compliance escalation, the company agrees to assume full legal liability and defense costs related to said termination. In perpetuity, with no cap. Beth froze. You could see the moment it clicked. Her face went the color of skim milk. Travis didn't understand. Not yet. So, I turned to him calm as church on Sunday and said, I didn't breach trust, I followed protocol, and now you've breached indemnity. He looked at Beth. She closed the folder like it was radioactive. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't even ask for a box. I just walked out 1 foot in front of the other as the lawyer sat there with a document in her lap that now read like a legal grenade with the pin pulled. And Travis, he still thought he won. I didn't slam doors. I didn't cry in the elevator. I didn't pull a Norma Ray and scream about injustice in front of the combat fridge. I walked out like I was going on my lunch break. Calm as a hospice nurse, heels clicking against the laminate like a slow metronome. There's a power in silence that loud men never understand. Security didn't even escort me. That was their first mistake. Back at my desk, I slid my chair in, unplugged my mouse, and opened my laptop. My device, company issued, but personally assigned and legally accessible under my termination clause. I synced my Outlook to local storage, pulled every flagged memo I'd ever sent regarding contract violations, SEC risks, internal NDA breaches, and questionable revenue smoothing language buried in third-party agreements. I wasn't stealing secrets. I was recovering the receipts of my own damn work. 11 years of audits, red lines, and escalation emails, all time-stamped, all traceable, all sent through company channels. I didn't need screenshots. I had metadata. Then I shut the lid, walked out, and gave my badge to the guy at the front desk with a smile that probably haunted him for weeks. By the time I got home, my inbox was already filling with pings from ex-cologs. The whispers had started. Why did Travis look so nervous when you left? Beth looked like she'd seen a ghost. Did you write that NDA clause? I didn't respond. Let them stew. Instead, I made tea, powered up my desktop, and spent the next 6 hours organizing my archive. I created folders, indemnity, ignored escalations, risk-flagged contracts, SEC violations suspected, and Bethany. I cross-referenced contract timestamps with email alerts. Every time I'd raised a concern about shady vendor clauses or misrepresented partnership structures, I linked it to the contract language Travis had fast-tracked. It was like mapping a crime scene with highlighters. And the pattern was disgusting. Travis hadn't just ignored warnings. He deleted people from threads, bypassed legal, and shoved contracts through under fabricated urgency. We'll lose the deal. This is how startups move. Don't be the bottleneck. But the worst part, Beth had seen it all. Maybe not every email, but enough. She'd been looped. She'd signed off. Her initials were on files where the risk section was conveniently blank. I wasn't just going up against a bad COO. I was going up against a bad system that had finally started eating itself. The next morning, I got a cease and desist email. Well, technically, it came from HR, but the language screamed Travis. It said, my behavior post-termination may constitute a violation of my NDA and demanded I cease any communication regarding internal company matters to outside parties. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped my coffee. Then I flagged the email, dropped it into the folder titled Retaliation, and made a note. Attempted suppression of whistleblower protections confirmed. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The indemnity clause had already activated. Their attempt to scare me into silence only built my case. From what I heard later, the panic started 3 days after I left. Legal called an emergency meeting. Beth didn't show. Travis started snapping at people in hallways. The board sent a routine inquiry about pending contracts. People started asking why the entire new vendor pipeline was frozen. And somewhere in the background, my attorney was sharpening her pen. I wasn't in the office anymore. But the storm, it had just found its eye. Her name was Marlene Vicks, and she didn't smile unless it was to bare teeth. Employment litigator by trade, velociraptor by temperament. I'd recommended her to our former GC years ago. when a VP tried to claim a junior staffer misunderstood what a closed-door meeting meant. Back then, she settled the case so fast it made HR dizzy and the VP vanished within a week. That's who I called. "Marlene," I said, "it's time." There was no need to explain. She remembered me. She remembered the clause. We met at her office 2 days later in a conference room colder than Travis's heart. I laid everything out. Email archive, flagged memos, contract discrepancies, the cease and desist. Her eyes scanned each page like a predator looking for soft tissue. Halfway through my summary, she held up a finger and said, "Stop talking. You've already won. Now we make them realize it." Together, we drafted a pre-litigation letter. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't a threat. It was surgical. Paragraph 1. The NDA clause, 12B verbatim. The indemnity trigger. The whistleblower alignment. The fact that they were now on the hook for my legal fees, their legal fees, and any damages, whether civil or criminal. Paragraph 2. Documentation of retaliation, termination following protected escalation, cease and desist attempt as intimidation, SEC-level exposure. Paragraph 3. A cordial invitation to settle quietly before we notified the relevant regulatory bodies. We didn't send it to HR. We didn't send it to Travis. We sent it to outside counsel, the firm representing the board. Because here's the thing about Travis. He played checkers loudly, slamming pieces, declaring victory before the board was even set. I played chess, and the queen had finally come off the back line. But I didn't stop there. That same day, I made a personal call, well, a casual industry update, as we used to call it in legal. I rang up Angela, a regulatory auditor I'd worked with on a prior third-party review. Sharp, ethical, and just nosy enough to be useful. "Hey, Angela, quick question," I said. "What's the threshold again for a company needing to self-report contract violations related to SEC-covered partnerships?" There was a pause. She knew what I was doing. "I'd check Form 8K, she said slowly. "And maybe if I were you, send me something informal. I'll decide if it warrants follow-up." I sent her a neatly collated PDF packet within the hour. No accusations, just observations, footnotes, flags. Travis, meanwhile, still hadn't flinched. From what I heard, he thought the cease and desist had scared me off. Told the product team I was emotionally unstable. Smirked in a strategy call when someone mentioned legal being overwhelmed. Said the board backed his vision. Then Marlene's letter arrived on the desk of the board's legal rep. It was like dropping a dead bird on a dinner plate. Within 48 hours, our old outside counsel, heavy-hitting white shoe firm with an allergy to bad PR, reached out to Travis, not with questions, with silence. Deliberate silence, the kind that fills a room like smoke before a fire alarm. Because the moment the board's lawyers confirmed 12B was real and enforceable, and that all my communications were documented, traceable, and backed by regulatory precedent, Travis became a liability. They didn't call me. They didn't need to. Marlene got the message first. "We are reviewing the matter internally. Please refrain from formal escalation until we've had time to assess." Translation: "We believe you. We are terrified. Please give us a minute to deal with our idiot problem." I didn't pop champagne. I didn't gloat. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, pulled up the vendor contracts Travis had steamrolled through, and began drafting a new timeline because this wasn't revenge. This was architecture, a careful demolition of a man who thought rules were optional, and I was just a speed bump. Empowerment doesn't come from shouting. It comes from silence so sharp it makes people bleed. They called it a closed strategic session, but everyone in that building knew what it really was. A panic meeting, no agenda, no minutes, no catered lunch, which for our board was like holding mass without the wine. Just 7 silent directors outside counsel dialing in with grim voices and a stack of paper 2 inches thick labeled risk profile immediate exposure. Travis wasn't invited. That alone set off alarm bells across the company. He found out when his badge wouldn't open the 17th floor elevator, stormed down to legal like a child locked out of his own birthday party, demanding answers. No one gave him any. Beth had retreated into convenient vacation. HR was suddenly unavailable. Even his executive assistant called in sick. Upstairs, the storm was forming quietly. The lawyer began her presentation with a deep breath and no pleasantries. "We've received a pre-litigation notification from a former employee. The central issue is Clause 12B of her NDA." They all flipped to it. Most of them had never read that far. NDA clauses are usually fluff, non-competes, confidentiality, boilerplate scare tactics. But 12B wasn't fluff. It was a legal landmine buried under 10 years of compliance foresight. She read it aloud. In the event of involuntary termination following a documented compliance-related escalation, the company shall identify the employee for all legal expenses incurred in defense and counteraction, inclusive of damages with no financial cap, time limit, or exemption of liability. She paused. Clause was drafted internally by the former employee at the request of then GC. It was reviewed by prior outside counsel and incorporated into 5 NDAs for specific staff considered mission-critical to compliance infrastructure. And then, because the gods have a sense of humor, she flipped the page. There's more. The employee has initiated communication with at least one regulatory body. She has evidence that her termination followed a protected escalation regarding SEC violation risk, meaning she let that hang. Meaning, if I sued, the company footed the bill, both mine and theirs. If I reported, the feds might not knock. They might break the damn door down. The directors stared at the table like it might give them a different ending. One cleared his throat. What's the exposure? Unlimited. Counsel said financially, reputationally, legally. She has documentation. Her work is time-stamped. The clause is airtight. And the executive responsible for her termination had full access to both her NDA and her prior memos. There's no plausible deniability here. Can we settle? Someone whispered. We're trying, she replied. But she hasn't made demands. She hasn't responded. She's just waiting. They all went still because in business, silence is the scariest sound of all. And down in his office, Travis was pacing like a tiger in a glass cage, still thinking this was about ego, about politics, about a disgruntled staffer too scared to fight. He didn't know they'd just reviewed a clause he signed off on, thinking it was a standard NDA. Didn't. Know the indemnity meant I could sue them into bankruptcy on their own dime. Didn't know the board now saw him less like a visionary and more like an active volcano. No one yelled. No one cried. But in that quiet carpeted room with its 1,000 chairs and filtered water, something changed. They realized they hadn't just fired a contracts manager. They lit a fuse, and now they were hearing the first hiss of flame. It came in a cream envelope delivered by courier like a wedding invitation from someone who hopes you forgot they stole your dog. A letter offering me a generous consulting severance package, 3 months of pay, a signed NDA. NG promised to explore future collaboration opportunities if I just agreed to move on quietly. They even had the gall to call it a gift. Marlene read it over, chuckled once, and slid it back across the table like it was covered in bedbugs. They still don't get it, she said. This isn't a negotiation. It's a funeral. They just haven't picked the casket yet. I declined. No drama, no counter, no angry reply. I simply ignored it. Instead, I compiled one final document, the memo. I took my original termination notice, highlighted the timeline of events, attached the flagged contract, my escalation emails, the cease and desist, and the 12B clause. Then I added a cover sheet submitted in good faith under federal and state compliance protections. For review, I didn't even sign my name at the bottom. I let the facts do the talking. Then I hit send. One email to the SEC, one to the state's Office of Financial Regulation, and one to Angela, my auditor contact, who replied 2 hours later with, "Holy hell, buckle up." Back at the firm, silence gave way to chaos. Legal initiated a quiet but furious review of every contract Travis had steamrolled through since his arrival, a compliance pulse check. They called it an internal comms. But behind the scenes, it was a full-on forensic audit. They reopened vendor agreements, subpoenaed Slack logs, and yanked sales into one-on-one interviews faster than you can say exposure risk. Word spread fast. New deal flow frozen, clients nervous. One of our biggest enterprise partners sent an email titled "Re-Governance Concerns" and copied half the C-White. Another delayed a $9mm renewal pending clarity. Whispers turned into meetings. Meetings turned into phone calls. Phone calls turned into panicked back-channel texts between board members asking what the hell else did Travis sign. Travis himself was still putting on a show, smiling in Zooms, making half-baked jokes about red tape strangling innovation. But the glint in his eye was gone. He looked tired, smaller, like someone who finally realized the hole wasn't a pothole. It was a sinkhole. And me? I didn't show up. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post a LinkedIn essay about resilience or finding new beginnings. I just brewed coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and watched the cracks spread. This wasn't rage. This wasn't revenge. This was what it feels like when the house you built starts pushing back because I wasn't the claw's queen anymore. I was the consequence. It hit the wire on a Monday morning. Time to destroy the week before it started. No byline, no direct quotes, just a surgical expose published by an industry outlet known for burying companies in polite, devastating prose. Headline: COO pushes through risky contracts. Legal retaliation ensues. The article read like it was written by someone with a direct line to my email archive, which of course it wasn't. I'd never spoken to a reporter. Didn't have to. The evidence had legs. Someone somewhere in the regulatory ecosystem, maybe Angela, maybe someone in the compliance office tired of covering for cowboys, had decided it was time for sunlight. The piece outlined everything with brutal elegance. A pattern of reckless vendor contracts signed without full legal review. An internal whistleblower raising red flags, then mysteriously terminated. A previously unseen indemnity clause triggering massive internal liability. Regulatory interest now formally engaged per unnamed sources. They didn't use my name. They didn't need to. Inside the office, panic bloomed like mold in a damp basement. Teams canceled meetings. Executives stopped replying to emails. Legal locked down internal document access for containment purposes. Sales went full mute. And then the domino fell. A respected compliance watchdog. One of those slow-moving, methodical groups whose opinion carries the weight of a Supreme Court ruling in the corporate world issued a rare public bulletin, a dry, heavily footnoted case study titled Retaliation, Red Flags, and the Cost of Ignoring Internal Compliance. Page 2. This case sets a precedent for how termination following documented compliance escalation may trigger binding indemnity clauses and potential SEC exposure. There it was, in ink in the public record, not just validation, canonization. Travis made it 2 more days. The board issued a statement. Short, cold, lethal, effective immediately. The chief operating officer has been suspended pending internal review. His access was revoked within the hour. Door badge, company Slack, admin privileges gone. He showed up that morning wearing his usual smug button-down and was turned away by security like he was trying to crash a wedding. People said he screamed in the lobby. Others said he just stood there dumbfounded holding a paper coffee cup while the badge reader blinked read. Me. I was reading the bulletin over Aquasaw. No victory dance, no gloating, because it was never about watching him fall. It was about making sure people like him couldn't climb again. After that article, I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to appear. I didn't need to exist. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. I'd become the story you whisper at conferences. The quiet clause you double-check before signing. The ghost in the machine who reminded them. Compliance isn't optional. It's a countdown. They say you can't hear a career die. That's a lie. You can hear it in the squeal of glass doors swinging open harder than necessary. In the sharp click of overpriced shoes stomping across boardroom tile. In the quiver of a man's voice when the confidence starts cracking and the room doesn't flinch. Travis stormed into the boardroom like he was still in charge. Eyes bloodshot. Shirt untucked in that tech bro? I'm too busy to care way. Waving a printed copy of the leaked article like it was a smoking gun instead of his own gravestone. "This is Bolst," he barked. "You people are letting that destroy everything we built." Silence. No one looked up. The board sat in still formation, hands folded, eyes forward like churchgoers listening to a sermon they already knew the ending to. Outside counsel was present. So was the general counsel seated at the end of the table like a high priest waiting to deliver last rites? Someone inside leaked it. Probably Beth Hell, maybe even that memo which you all fired. I warned you she was poison. She's been plotting this for months. Still no one moved. Then the general counsel spoke, voice like ice sliding off a blade. "We're not here to discuss leaks. We're here to review exposure." He opened a folder, thick, heavy, familiar. The NDA. My NDA. The one Travis had thrown at me like it was a sword. The one I'd written clause by clause, line by line, years ago in a different office, under a different GC to protect the company from itself. He slid the contract across the table toward Travis. One hand, no rush. Open to paragraph 12B, highlighted. "Here's the clause you invoked when you terminated her for breach of trust." Travis leaned over it, eyes scanning like he was just now realizing it wasn't written in his language. You didn't just fire her, the general counsel said, voice low and exact. You gave her unlimited funding to destroy us on our dime. Silence again, but this time, it screamed. Travis's face drained. You could see the exact second it registered. Clause 12B wasn't a footnote. It was a warhead. All those emails, all those memos, every ignored escalation, every cover-up, every deal he forced through like a toddler with a hammer, all of it was now legally tied to an indemnity trigger with no cap. The board didn't need a debate. One of them simply said, "Let's vote." No discussion, just 5 hands raised. Then 6, then 7, terminated for cause, effective immediately. No severance, no vesting, no shield. The general counsel nodded towards security, already waiting outside. Travis tried to speak, but no one cared. The door shut behind him with a soft hiss that sounded a hell of a lot like justice. I didn't find out from the press, or a friend, or a board leak. I found out from Marlene. She emailed me a single screenshot. The board's internal vote tally, black and white, time-stamped and signed. No greeting, no commentary, just the subject line, paragraph 12B, delivered. I stared at it for a long time. Not smiling, not crying, just still. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about writing a clause so precise, so quiet, and so deadly that it sat in the background like until someone enough stepped on it. And now that viper had teeth and a body count. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot silent revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit.